The Butterfly. They Mocked. First document. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the cold porthole of the transport vessel, watching the massive alien space station grow larger against the star-filled void. The Galactic Council's headquarters looked like a metallic flower blooming in space, its silver petals stretching out in perfect symmetry. Each petal housed a different alien species, and somewhere in that maze of corridors and chambers, humanity was about to face its greatest test. Elena touched the small butterfly pin on her collar, a gift from her daughter back on Earth. The tiny piece of jewelry felt warm against her fingers, a reminder of home and everything she was fighting for. Around her, the other human delegates sat in nervous silence, their faces pale and drawn. They all knew what was at stake. The Zephyrian ambassador, a tall creature with blue-scaled skin and 4 arms, glided past Elena's seat. Its serpentine eyes fixed on her for a moment, and she caught the unmistakable glint of amusement in its gaze. The alien's translator device crackled to life. "How quaint," the Zephyrian said, its voice carrying the metallic undertone of the translation system. "The humans send their butterfly collector to negotiate for their species' survival." Elena had heard variations of this insult countless times over the past 3 months. Ever since the Galactic Council had discovered Earth, humanity had been treated like children playing dress-up. The fact that Earth's lead xenobiologist happened to study insects only made the mockery worse. To most alien species, humans were soft, weak, and laughably obsessed with tiny creatures that served no apparent purpose. The transport shuddered as it docked with the station. Elena gathered her research materials, including several sealed containers that held some of Earth's most remarkable insects. She had specifically chosen specimens that demonstrated the incredible diversity and adaptability of terrestrial life, though she doubted the Council would be impressed. The docking bay was a cathedral of alien engineering, its walls stretching up into darkness, while holographic displays showed the locations of hundreds of different species' quarters. Elena counted at least 50 different types of beings moving through the space, from the crystalline Vorthon to the gas cloud ethereals that floated in specialized environmental suits. Commander Sarah Chen, Earth's military attaché, fell into step beside Elena as they walked toward the central hub. Chen was everything Elena wasn't. Tall, intimidating, with the kind of presence that made even aliens step aside. Her uniform was crisp and her bearing military perfect, but Elena had noticed the worry lines around her eyes growing deeper each day. "Remember," Chen said quietly, "you're not just representing Earth's scientific community. You're representing all of humanity. Every word you say in that chamber could determine whether we get to join the Council or get marked for elimination." Elena nodded, though her stomach churned at the reminder. The Galactic Council had a simple policy for newly discovered species: prove your worth or be contained. Containment meant an invisible barrier around Earth's solar system, cutting humanity off from the stars forever. Worse, it meant being watched, studied, and possibly eliminated if humans ever became a threat. They reached the Council chambers, a vast spherical room where representatives from 47 different species sat in carefully designed seating areas. Each section was adapted for the specific needs of its occupants. The aquatic Belgians sat in pools of their native waters, while the silicon-based krill occupied heated platforms that glowed red-hot. At the center of the chamber floated a holographic display showing Earth in perfect detail. Blue oceans, white clouds, and green continents slowly rotated while data streams flowed around it, displaying everything the Council had learned about humanity in their brief surveillance. The Council speaker, an ancient being that looked like a walking tree with golden bark and silver leaves, raised one of its branch-like arms for silence. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of millennia. We gather today to evaluate the species known as humans from the planet designated Earth 783. As is our custom, we will hear testimony regarding their potential value to the galactic community. Elena felt hundreds of alien eyes turn toward her as she stepped forward. The butterfly pin on her collar caught the light from the central display, casting tiny rainbow reflections across her white lab coat. She heard several species emit what she had learned were their versions of laughter. The Thorgan representative, a creature that resembled a metallic scorpion the size of a small vehicle, clicked its mandibles together in obvious amusement. "Honored Council," it said through its translator, "we have observed this species for several rotations. They are weak, divided among themselves, and obsessed with creatures so small they are barely visible. How can beings who study insects possibly contribute to our great civilization?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Elena had expected this response, but it still stung. She had dedicated her life to understanding the intricate relationships between species, the delicate balance that kept ecosystems functioning, and the remarkable adaptations that allowed even the smallest creatures to survive in hostile environments. Furthermore, the Thorgan continued, their technology is primitive, their lifespans short, and their bodies fragile. They cannot survive in most galactic environments without artificial support. What possible benefit could they provide? The crystalline Vorthan representative chimed in, its voice like breaking glass filtered through the translator. Their planet shows signs of environmental damage caused by their own actions. They war among themselves despite sharing a single small world. These are not the qualities of a species ready to join our community. Elena stepped closer to the central display, her heart pounding. This was her moment, the culmination of everything she had worked toward since first contact. She touched her butterfly pin once more, thinking of her daughter, of Earth, of all the incredible life forms that called her planet home. "Honored Council," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, despite her nervousness. "You see weakness where I see strength? You see insignificance where I see incredible potential? May I show you what you've missed?" The council speaker gestured for her to proceed, though Elena could sense the skepticism radiating from most of the assembled representatives. She activated her personal display unit, and suddenly, the space above her head filled with images of Earth's insects in stunning detail. "These are not just small creatures," Elena said, her voice gaining strength as she moved into familiar territory. "These are master engineers, chemists, and survivors. This is a butterfly whose wings can create hurricane-force winds in the right conditions. This is a beetle that can lift objects 800 times its own body weight. This is an ant that farms fungus more efficiently than most galactic food production systems." The images shifted and changed, showing time-lapse footage of insect colonies working together, building structures, adapting to environmental changes. Elena watched as some of the alien representatives leaned forward with genuine interest for the first time. "You speak of our short lifespans," Elena continued, "but some of these creatures live for only days, yet they accomplish feats of engineering that last for centuries. You mention our fragile bodies, but these insects survive in environments that would kill most species in this chamber. They live in Arctic conditions, in desert heat, underwater, and even in the vacuum of space." The ethereal representative, speaking through a complex harmonic translator, asked, "What relevance do these small creatures have to galactic civilization?" Elena smiled, knowing she had been hoping someone would ask exactly that question. "Because humans learned from them. Our architecture is based on termite mounds that maintain perfect temperature without artificial climate control. Our communication networks were inspired by ant colonies that can coordinate millions of individuals without central authority. Our most advanced materials science comes from studying spider silk and beetle shells." She paused, looking around the chamber at the various alien forms. "But more importantly, These creatures taught us something that I believe makes humanity unique among galactic species. They taught us that size, strength, and obvious power are not the only measures of value in the universe. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems and translators. Elena could feel the attention of every being present focused on her words. Humans don't just study insects, honored council. We learned from them that cooperation can accomplish what individual strength cannot. We learned that adaptation and intelligence can overcome physical limitations. We learned that even the smallest voice can change the world if it carries the right message. Elena activated another sequence of images, these showing human achievements inspired by insect study. Medical nanobots based on ant behavior, buildings that could self-repair using techniques learned from bee colonies, agricultural systems that maintained perfect ecological balance by mimicking natural insect relationships. You ask what humans can contribute to galactic civilization, Elena said, her voice now carrying the passion that had driven her through decades of research. We can contribute the perspective of beings who learn to see strength in seeming weakness, who found solutions by studying the smallest members of our world's community. We can offer the viewpoint of a species that believes every form of life has value, no matter how insignificant it might appear. The Thorgan representative shifted restlessly, its metallic exoskeleton scraping against its platform. Pretty words, insect studier, but words do not prove capability. Your species has never faced the challenges that space presents. You have never dealt with true predators or hostile environments beyond your small world. Elena felt her confidence waver slightly. The Thorgan was right in one sense. Humanity had no experience with galactic conflicts or the kind of threats that existed in the wider universe. But before she could respond, Commander Chen stepped forward. "If I may address the Council," Chen said, her military bearing evident even in the alien chamber. The Council speaker gestured permission, and Chen activated her own display. Images of human military operations filled the space above the central platform. But these weren't scenes of human-against-human warfare. Instead, they showed rescue operations, disaster relief, and peacekeeping missions. The Thorgan representative speaks of predators and hostile environments, Chen said. Humans have faced both throughout our history. But we learned something from our insect teachers that perhaps other species have not. We learned that the greatest strength comes not from individual power, but from collective action in defense of the vulnerable. The display showed human soldiers working alongside civilian specialists in disaster zones, protecting evacuation routes, coordinating massive relief efforts. Elena realized that Chen was continuing her theme, showing how human military doctrine had been influenced by the same principles Elena had found in insect societies. Our military traditions, Chen continued, are built around the concept that the strongest protect the weakest, that no one is left behind, and that victory comes through coordination rather than domination. These are lessons we learned from observing creatures like ants and bees, species that Dr. Vasquez has studied extensively. Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward Chen for making that connection. The commander was showing the Council that humanity's approach to conflict was fundamentally different from what they might expect, and that this difference came directly from their study of Earth's smallest inhabitants. But even as Elena felt hope rising in her chest, she noticed the skeptical expressions on many alien faces. The Zephyrian ambassador was actually making sounds that the translator rendered as laughter, and several other representatives were exchanging what appeared to be dismissive comments. The Council speaker raised a branch arm for attention. "Dr. Vasquez, Commander Chen, your presentations are interesting. However, the Council requires more than philosophy and inspiration. We need concrete evidence of your species' potential contribution to galactic security and prosperity." Elena's heart sank. She had hoped that showing the sophisticated lessons humanity had learned from insects would be enough to demonstrate their value, but clearly the council needed something more tangible. She looked at her sealed specimen containers, wondering if there was anything she could show that would make a difference. Before she could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. The holographic display flickered and changed, showing something that made Elena's blood run cold. A massive fleet of dark ships was approaching the station from the edge of the system, moving in a formation that spoke of hostile intent. The council speaker's voice carried a note of urgency that transcended species barriers. The hive approaches. All representatives to emergency stations. This session is suspended until the threat is resolved. As chaos erupted around them and aliens rushed to their species-specific emergency protocols, Elena found herself standing frozen in the center of the chamber, still holding her collection of Earth's insects, while the galaxy's most powerful civilizations prepared for war against an enemy she had never heard of. Commander Chen grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her toward what appeared to be a human-designated safe area. "Come on, Doctor. Looks like we're about to get a very different kind of test than we expected." Elena clutched her specimens tighter, the butterfly pin on her collar catching the flashing emergency lights as the space station prepared for battle. Whatever the hive was, whatever was coming, she had a feeling that humanity's real trial was just beginning. The butterfly they mocked. Second document. The emergency klaxons continued to wail as Elena and Commander Chen rushed through corridors filled with panicking aliens. Species that had sat in dignified judgment moments before were now scrambling for defensive positions, their translators crackling with urgent communications in dozens of languages. Elena clutched her specimen containers against her chest, unwilling to abandon her life's work, even in the face of apparent disaster. Commander Chen guided her through a maze of passages toward what the emergency signs indicated was a human-designated shelter area. As they ran, Elena caught glimpses of massive viewports showing the approaching fleet. The hive ships were unlike anything she had seen in the Council's databases. They moved with an organic fluidity that reminded her uncomfortably of swarming insects, their dark hulls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Chen," Elena gasped as they reached the shelter area. "What exactly is the hive?" The commander's face was grim as she secured the blast doors behind them. The shelter was a utilitarian space with basic life support and communication equipment, clearly designed for short-term occupation during emergencies. From the briefings I received, they're the reason the Galactic Council exists in the first place. Some kind of collective intelligence that showed up about 2,000 years ago and started consuming entire systems. The Council formed as a defensive alliance. Elena set down her containers on a small table and activated the communication panel. The main screen showed feeds from the station's external sensors, tracking the approaching fleet. She counted at least 50 ships of various sizes, all moving in perfect coordination without any visible communication between them. "They consume systems?" Elena asked, watching the dark ships grow larger on the screen. "Strip them bare," Chen confirmed, checking her sidearm even though Elena doubted personal weapons would matter in a space battle. "Resources, technology, sometimes entire populations. The Council's been holding them at bay for centuries, but intelligence suggests they've been building up for a major push." On the screen, Elena watched as the Council's defensive fleet moved to intercept the hive ships. The alien vessels were impressive, representing the combined military might of 47 different civilizations. Crystalline Vorthan ships that could phase through solid matter, Thorgan dreadnoughts bristling with plasma weapons, Zephyrian vessels that moved like liquid mercury through space. It should have been an overwhelming display of power. The first engagement began at maximum range, with the Council fleet opening fire in coordinated volleys. Streams of energy and exotic matter struck the hive ships, but Elena watched in horror as the dark vessels seemed to adapt in real time. Energy shields that should have been overwhelmed suddenly became more efficient. Hull configurations that should have been vulnerable shifted and changed to deflect incoming fire. "They're learning," Elena whispered, her scientific mind recognizing the pattern even as her human emotions recoiled from it. "Look at the way they're adapting their defensive configurations. Each hit teaches them how to better resist the next one." Commander Chen frowned at the display. "That's impossible. No AI can adapt that quickly to unknown weapon systems." "It's not artificial intelligence," Elena said, leaning closer to the screen. "It's collective intelligence, like a swarm of insects sharing information instantaneously across the entire group. Each ship learns from the experiences of every other ship." As if to prove her point, the Hive fleet suddenly shifted formation. Instead of the loose tactical arrangement they had maintained during approach, they began moving in tight, interconnected patterns. When Council weapons targeted one ship, others would immediately move to provide overlapping defensive coverage. When a Hive vessel was damaged, nearby ships would coordinate to compensate for its reduced capabilities. The battle turned ugly quickly. Council ships that had centuries of combat experience found themselves outmaneuvered by an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every tactic. The Thorgan dreadnought that Elena remembered mocking her presentation was swarmed by smaller Hive vessels that coordinated their attacks with mathematical precision. She watched in sick fascination as they systematically disabled its weapon systems before moving on to the next target. "The Council fleet is falling back," Chen observed, her military experience allowing her to read the tactical situation more clearly than Elena could. "They're trying to establish a defensive perimeter around the station." Elena was about to respond when something on her specimen table caught her eye. One of her containers had been jolted during their rush to the shelter, and the lid had come partially loose. Inside, she could see the delicate form of a monarch butterfly that she had brought as an example of Earth's remarkable migration capabilities. But what drew her attention was the way it was moving. The butterfly was agitated, its wings beating in rapid, irregular patterns that Elena recognized from her years of study. It was the same movement she had observed when monarch colonies detected threats to their migratory routes. The same pattern she had seen when environmental changes forced them to adapt their navigation methods. "Chen," Elena said slowly, "I need to get to the council chambers." The commander looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "Doctor, there's a battle going on out there. The station could be boarded at any moment." "That's exactly why I need to get there," Elena insisted, carefully securing the Monarch container. "I think I know something about the Hive that the Council doesn't." Chen shook her head. "Elena, I know you're brilliant, but this is military combat, not insect behavior. What could you possibly know about fighting an enemy like this?" Elena gathered her specimen containers, her mind racing with connections that seemed impossible but felt absolutely right. "Everything," she said. "I know everything about fighting an enemy like this, because I've been studying enemies exactly like this my entire career." Before Chen could object further, Elena was moving toward the blast doors. The commander cursed and followed, unwilling to let the Earth delegation's lead scientist wander the station alone during a battle. The corridors were chaos. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows, while aliens ran in every direction. Some species were evacuating to deeper parts of the station, while others moved toward what Elena assumed were combat positions. The cacophony of translator devices trying to render dozens of languages simultaneously created a wall of electronic noise that made communication nearly impossible. Elena pushed through the crowds, following the route they had taken earlier to the council chambers. Behind her, she could hear Chen trying to clear a path while maintaining communication with what remained of Earth's security detail. The butterfly container in Elena's hands continued to show the agitated movement pattern that had caught her attention. When they reached the council chambers, Elena found them in controlled chaos. The various species representatives were coordinating defensive measures while the massive central display showed the ongoing battle. The Hive fleet had pushed through the Council's outer defenses and was now engaging ships at close range around the station itself. The Council speaker noticed Elena's arrival with what might have been surprise, though it was difficult to read emotions on a tree-like face. "Dr. Vasquez, you should be in the emergency shelters. This is not a time for scientific observation." "With respect, honored speaker," Elena said, stepping toward the central display, "this is exactly the time for scientific observation. You're fighting the Hive wrong." A ripple of what Elena interpreted as indignation went through the chamber. The Thorgan representative, despite having its species flagship currently under heavy attack, managed to voice its objection. "The human presumes to advise species with millennia of combat experience?" Its translator crackled. "This is not the time for insect analogies." "Actually," Elena said, moving closer to the tactical display, "it's exactly the time for insect analogies." She activated her portable display unit, causing images of Earth's social insects to appear alongside the real-time battle feeds. "Because you're not fighting ships, you're fighting a swarm." The chamber fell silent except for the ongoing communications from the battle. Elena could feel the attention of dozens of alien intelligences focused on her, some skeptical, others desperate enough to listen to any new idea. "Look at their movement patterns," Elena continued, highlighting sections of the tactical display. "Perfect coordination without central command structure, instant adaptation to new threats, collective learning across the entire group, individual units sacrificing themselves for the benefit of the whole. This isn't military tactics, it's swarm behavior." She manipulated the display to overlay her insect footage with the Hive ship movements. The similarity was unmistakable. The Hive vessels moved like a colony of army ants, flowing around obstacles, overwhelming defensive positions through sheer coordinated numbers rather than individual strength. "Your fleets are fighting them like their military opponents," Elena said, her voice gaining confidence as the pattern became clearer. "But swarm intelligences don't think like military commanders. They don't have tactics in the way you understand them. They have instincts, survival patterns, behavioral responses that have been refined over millions of years of evolution." The crystalline Vorthon representative chimed a question that came through the translator as, "If this is accurate, how do you propose we combat such an enemy?" Elena looked at her specimen containers, particularly at the agitated monarch butterfly. "You don't fight a swarm the same way you fight an army. Swarms have different vulnerabilities. They're incredibly efficient at coordinated action, but that efficiency depends on constant information sharing. Disrupt their communication, and individual units become confused, disconnected." She opened the monarch container carefully, allowing the butterfly to emerge into the chamber's artificial atmosphere. Several alien representatives recoiled, clearly uncomfortable with the presence of what they saw as a primitive creature in their war council. "But more importantly," Elena continued, "swarms respond to environmental pressures in predictable ways. They follow chemical trails, respond to pheromone signals, adapt to changing conditions through genetic programming that can be influenced." The butterfly settled on Elena's outstretched hand, its wings slowly returning to normal patterns as it adjusted to the new environment. Elena smiled, remembering countless hours spent observing similar adaptations in her laboratory back on Earth. "You've been trying to destroy them through direct confrontation," she said. "But what if instead of fighting the swarm, we convinced it to go somewhere else?" Commander Chen, who had been following the conversation with growing amazement, stepped forward. "Elena, are you suggesting we can somehow redirect an entire hostile fleet?" "Not redirect," Elena corrected. her eyes bright with sudden inspiration. Guide. The same way we guide beneficial insects away from crops or toward pollination sites. We create artificial signals that override their natural behavioral programming. The council speaker raised a branch arm for attention. Dr. Vasquez, this is highly theoretical. Do you have specific recommendations for implementation? Elena nodded, her mind racing through decades of research into insect behavior modification. I need access to your communication networks and detailed scans of hive ship emissions. If they're truly operating as a biological swarm, they're using some form of chemical or electromagnetic signaling to coordinate. Once we identify that frequency, we can jam it, Chen finished, understanding dawning on her face. Better than jam it, Elena said, the butterfly on her hand spreading its wings as if in agreement. We can hijack it. We can send them false signals that make them think there's a more attractive target somewhere else, or that this area has become hostile to their survival. The chamber erupted into rapid discussion as various species representatives began considering the implications. The ethereal delegate's harmonic translator was working overtime to render their excited gaseous communications, while the Thorgan representative was coordinating with their military units to test Elena's theory. On the main display, the battle continued to rage. The hive ships had managed to penetrate the station's immediate defensive perimeter and were beginning to attach themselves to the outer hull sections. Elena watched with sick fascination as they began what appeared to be drilling operations, cutting through the station's armor with coordinated precision. We need to act quickly, the council speaker announced. Dr. Vasquez, your theory is untested, but our current tactics are clearly failing. What do you need to implement this plan? Elena looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, then down at the small butterfly perched on her hand. Everything she had learned about the intricate relationships between species, the delicate balance of natural systems, and the surprising strength found in seemingly fragile creatures had led to this moment. I need complete access to your sensor networks, she said, and I need every species here to contribute data on electromagnetic and chemical communication methods. If we're going to speak to a swarm intelligence, we need to use every tool at our disposal. As alien representatives began coordinating their resources under Elena's guidance, she carefully returned the monarch butterfly to its container. Through the chamber's viewports, she could see more hive ships approaching from the darkness of space, their organic formations growing larger against the stars. The creature they had mocked for studying butterflies was now humanity's best hope for survival. But as Elena began analyzing the incoming data streams, she realized that survival might not be enough. If her theory was correct, if she could truly communicate with the hive intelligence, she might be able to do something that would change humanity's status in the galaxy forever. She just hoped she was right about how swarms really worked. The butterfly they mocked. Third document. The data streams flowing across Elena's portable display were unlike anything she had ever analyzed. Each hive ship was broadcasting on 17 different electromagnetic frequencies simultaneously, while also releasing complex chemical signatures into the vacuum of space through specialized venting systems. The pattern was hauntingly familiar, yet impossibly sophisticated. "It's beautiful," Elena whispered, her fingers dancing across the control interface as she mapped the communication network. Around her, representatives from 47 species worked frantically to provide additional sensor data, their previous dismissal of human capabilities replaced by desperate hope. Commander Chen peered over Elena's shoulder at the scrolling analysis. "It looks like random noise to me." "That's because you're looking at individual signals," Elena explained, highlighting sections of the data stream. "But watch what happens when I overlay them." She manipulated the display to show all 17 frequencies as a single composite pattern. "It's not random at all. It's a language more complex than anything we've encountered." The crystalline Vorthon representative chimed urgently through its translator. Dr. Vasquez, hive-breaching units have penetrated hull section 7. Time is critical. Elena nodded without looking up from her work. On the main chamber display, she could see footage from the station's internal sensors, showing hive drones moving through corridors with the same fluid coordination she had observed in their ships. They looked disturbingly organic, like metallic insects the size of humans, with multiple limbs adapted for different functions. Some carried cutting tools, others seemed designed for data collection, and a few had configurations she couldn't identify. "I'm reading their basic communication structure," Elena announced, her voice carrying across the chamber despite the ongoing chaos. "They use a combination of electromagnetic pulses and chemical markers to coordinate actions. It's essentially the same system used by Earth's leafcutter ant colonies, but scaled up by several orders of magnitude." The Thorgan representative, whose species was currently engaged in corridor-to-corridor fighting with hive drones, clicked its mandibles impatiently. "Understanding their communication is irrelevant if we cannot use that knowledge to stop them." "That's just it," Elena said, looking up from her display for the first time in several minutes. "I think I can stop them, or at least redirect them, but I need something they'll perceive as a more attractive target than this station." The council speaker rustled its silver leaves thoughtfully. What would a swarm intelligence find attractive? Elena closed her eyes, thinking of every swarm species she had studied over the years. Resources. Specifically resources that can support rapid reproduction and expansion. They're not here for conquest in the way we understand it. They're here because something triggered their expansion instinct. She opened her eyes and looked around the chamber at the assembled alien representatives. What changed recently? What would make them suddenly decide to push into council space after centuries of relatively stable boundaries? The chamber fell silent as various species consulted their data records. It was the ethereal representative who provided the answer, their gaseous form shimmering with agitation as their harmonic translator worked. "The Kepler 442 system," the translated voice announced, "rich in rare minerals essential for advanced technology. The Council authorized full mining operations 6 standard months ago." Elena felt pieces clicking into place in her mind. "They're not attacking. They're competing for resources. The mining operation sent signals into space that the Hive interpreted as a territorial claim on something they needed." "Can we signal them to leave our territories alone?" Chen asked. "Better than that," Elena said, her excitement growing as the full plan formed in her mind. "I think I can convince them that there's a much better resource location somewhere else entirely." She began entering commands into her display, calling up stellar cartography data from the Council's databases. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence as she identified what she was looking for. "Here," she said, highlighting a star system on the edge of Council space. "The NGC 7293 Nebula. It's rich in the same rare minerals as Kepler 442, but it's uninhabited and outside Council territory. If I can convince the Hive that this location has higher resource density and lower defensive resistance," the Zephyrian ambassador, who had spent the entire crisis coordinating evacuation procedures, looked up from its workstation. "You believe you can lie to a collective intelligence?" Elena smiled, thinking of the countless times she had used pheromone lures and chemical signals to redirect insect behavior in her research. "I prefer to think of it as environmental modification. We're going to create artificial signals that make the nebula appear more attractive than continued conflict with the Council." The main display suddenly flashed red as new alarms began sounding. Additional Hive ships were emerging from hyperspace, their numbers doubling the size of the attacking fleet. Elena watched in growing alarm as the tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. "Dr. Vasquez," the council speaker said urgently, "whatever you're planning must be implemented immediately." Elena took a deep breath and activated the station's primary communication array. The power requirements were enormous, and she could feel the artificial gravity fluctuating as the station's systems were pushed to their limits. But if her theory was correct, she was about to attempt something that had never been tried before: direct communication with a collective intelligence spanning dozens of ships and thousands of individual units. "I'm going to broadcast on all 17 of their communication frequencies simultaneously," she explained as she fine-tuned the transmission parameters. "The signal will mimic the chemical and electromagnetic signatures of a much larger resource concentration in the nebula." Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared to transmit. Everything depended on her understanding of swarm behavior being applicable to an intelligence that had evolved far from Earth. If she was wrong, the false signal might be ignored. If she was catastrophically wrong, it might provoke an even more aggressive response. "Broadcasting now," Elena announced. The effect was immediate and dramatic. On the tactical display, Elena watched as Hive ships throughout the system suddenly stopped their coordinated attack patterns. Individual vessels began broadcasting rapidly between themselves, their communication traffic spiking to levels that overloaded the Council's monitoring equipment. "They're responding," the crystalline Vorthon representative chimed excitedly. "All Hive units have ceased offensive operations." Elena held her breath as she monitored the response patterns. The swarm intelligence was clearly processing her artificial signal, comparing it to their existing data about resource locations throughout the galaxy. She had essentially told them that there was a banquet available elsewhere, but would they believe her? The answer came in the form of movement. One by one, Hive ships began disengaging from the station and forming up into departure formations. The drones that had breached the station's hull began withdrawing, following the same coordinated patterns they had used during the initial attack. "It's working," Chen breathed, watching the tactical display as the Hive fleet began to orient toward the nebula Elena had indicated. But Elena wasn't celebrating yet. Something about the movement patterns seemed off, different from the simple redirection she had expected. The Hive ships weren't just leaving, they were organizing into a specific formation that she recognized from her studies of migratory insects. "Oh no," Elena whispered, realization dawning with horrible clarity. "They're not just relocating to the nebula, they're preparing for territorial expansion." Commander Chen looked at her sharply. "What does that mean?" Elena's face went pale as she watched the Hive formation complete its organization. "It means I didn't just redirect them. I told them about a resource so valuable that they're preparing to claim it permanently. They're going to establish a breeding colony in that nebula, and once they do, they'll have a permanent base for expansion into Council space," the Thorgan representative completed, its translator crackling with something that might have been respect or horror. Elena stared at the display, watching as her solution transformed into a potentially catastrophic problem. The Hive fleet was indeed departing Council space, but they were doing so as the first wave of what would become a massive colonization effort. She had bought time, perhaps years, but at the cost of giving the enemy a strategic foothold they had never possessed before. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Elena had successfully communicated with the Hive intelligence, proving that her understanding of swarm behavior was applicable even to alien collective consciousnesses. But the result was that humanity's first contribution to galactic civilization was potentially making the universe's greatest threat even more dangerous. "Dr. Vasquez," the council speaker said slowly, "you have demonstrated remarkable capability and unprecedented success in communicating with the Hive. However, the long-term consequences of your action require careful consideration." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of unintended consequences settling on her shoulders. "I know. I can fix this, but I'll need time to develop a more sophisticated approach. Swarm intelligences are vulnerable to certain types of psychological manipulation, but it requires understanding their reproductive cycles and territorial behaviors in much greater detail." How much time? The Zephyrian ambassador asked. Months, Elena admitted. Maybe a year to develop and test a comprehensive solution. The chamber erupted in rapid discussion as various species debated the implications of Elena's success and failure. Some argued that humanity had proven its value by achieving communication with the hive. Others contended that the strategic situation was now worse than before. It was Commander Chen who cut through the debate with military directness. The question isn't whether Dr. Vasquez made a mistake. The question is whether humanity gets the chance to fix it. Elena looked around the chamber at the alien faces, some hostile, some curious, most simply uncertain. The butterfly pin on her collar caught the light from the tactical display, creating tiny rainbows in the artificial atmosphere. She thought of her daughter back on Earth, of all the children who would grow up either free to explore the galaxy or trapped forever in their home system. "Honored Council," Elena said, stepping forward to address the assembly directly, "I request that humanity be granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council. Not because we've proven ourselves, but because you need us." The Thorgan representative's mandibles clicked dismissively. "You have potentially made our situation worse. Why should we trust you with membership?" "Because," Elena said, her voice growing stronger as she found her conviction, "I'm the only being in this chamber who has successfully communicated with the hive. The only one who understands how their collective intelligence processes information. The only one who might be able to develop a permanent solution to a threat that has plagued the galaxy for 2,000 years. She gestured to her specimen containers, still sitting on the table where she had left them during the crisis. "You mocked me for studying butterflies, but those butterflies taught me how to speak to the most dangerous intelligence in the galaxy. What else might humanity learn from the creatures you consider insignificant? What other perspectives might we offer that could change everything?" The council speaker raised a branch arm for attention. "Dr. Vasquez, you speak with confidence about solving a threat that has defied our greatest minds for millennia." "I speak with the confidence of someone who has spent her life learning from teachers you've never thought to listen to," Elena replied. "Every insect on Earth has survived for millions of years by finding solutions to impossible problems. They've taught humanity to think differently about cooperation, communication, and survival." Elena paused, looking around the chamber at the representatives of 47 different civilizations. "Give humanity a chance to contribute that perspective. Give us the opportunity to prove that sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message. Give us time to fix what I've broken and show you what we can really accomplish." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, the soft hum of life support systems, the distant sounds of repair crews working to fix the damage from the hive incursion. Finally, the council speaker rustled its leaves in what Elena had learned was their species' gesture of formal decision-making. "The council will deliberate," the speaker announced. "Dr. Vasquez, your species has demonstrated both capability and liability in equal measure. The decision regarding humanity's status will require careful consideration of both factors." As the various representatives began filing out of the chamber to consult with their respective governments, Elena found herself standing alone at the central display. The tactical screen showed the last of the hive ships disappearing into hyperspace, heading toward the nebula where they would begin establishing the colony that her intervention had inadvertently enabled. Commander Chen approached, her expression unreadable. "So, Doctor, think we passed the test?" Elena looked down at her specimen containers, then back up at the display showing the departing threat. "I think we just wrote ourselves a much more difficult exam." 3 days later, Elena stood in the same council chamber, watching as the formal vote was tallied. The hive crisis had changed everything. Some species argued that humanity's unconventional approach and successful communication with the enemy proved their value. Others maintained that the long-term strategic consequences made humans too dangerous to trust with membership. When the final count was announced, the result was closer than Elena had dared hope. 24 species in favor of provisional membership, 23 opposed. The council speaker's vote would break the tie. After careful deliberation, the speaker announced, "The council recognizes that the galaxy faces unprecedented challenges requiring unprecedented solutions. Humanity will be granted provisional membership, with the understanding that Dr. Vasquez will lead a joint task force to develop permanent countermeasures against the hive threat." Elena felt her knees go weak with relief. Around her, the alien representatives who had voted in favor of humanity gestured their approval in dozens of different ways. Even some of those who had opposed membership seemed resigned rather than hostile. As the session concluded and representatives began departing, Elena noticed Commander Chen approaching with someone she didn't recognize. The newcomer wore military insignia that Elena couldn't identify, but his bearing suggested very high rank. "Dr. Vasquez," Chen said, "I'd like you to meet Admiral Harrison, commander of Earth's new Galactic Defense Initiative." The Admiral extended his hand, and Elena shook it with fingers that were still trembling slightly from the stress of the past few days. "Doctor, on behalf of the Human Defense Command, I wanted to personally thank you for what you've accomplished here." "Thank you, Admiral, but we're just getting started. The hive colony in the nebula represents a long-term threat that will require years of work to address properly." Admiral Harrison smiled. "Actually, Doctor, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. Your success here has convinced Earth's leadership to establish a new branch of the military specifically focused on xenobiological threats and opportunities. We'd like you to head the program." Elena blinked in surprise. "Admiral, I'm a research scientist, not a military officer." "Which is exactly why we need you," he replied. "What you've shown here is that the galaxy's greatest challenges might require perspectives that traditional military thinking can't provide. We want to build an entire organization around the principle that understanding other forms of life is our greatest strategic advantage." Elena looked around the council chamber, thinking of everything that had happened. The mockery she had endured, the crisis she had helped create. The narrow victory that gave humanity a chance to prove itself worthy of galactic civilization. All of it had started with her determination to show the galaxy what they could learn from Earth's smallest inhabitants. "What would you call this organization?" Elena asked. Admiral Harrison's smile widened. "We were thinking of calling it the Strategic Earth Alliance Legion. The SEAL program for short." Elena felt a laugh building in her chest, thinking of the butterfly pin on her collar and the long journey that had brought her to this moment. "Admiral, I think I'd be honored to serve." As they left the council chamber together, Elena caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the viewports. The small butterfly pin on her collar glinted in the starlight. A reminder of everything she had learned from the creatures others dismissed as insignificant. Behind her, the representatives of 47 alien civilizations were beginning the complex process of integrating humanity into galactic society. The butterfly they had mocked was now leading Earth's first interstellar military program. And somewhere in the depths of space, a collective intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia was learning that sometimes the smallest voices carried the most profound messages. Elena touched her butterfly pin one more time, thinking of her daughter back on Earth, and smiled. Humanity's greatest adventures were just beginning.